All right, we are here today with a manager extraordinaire, someone that I am really excited to get to speak to. First off, because he's from the DMV. Second off, because he's gotten to heights in the industry that most people from the DMV aspire towards. And so I'm gonna have you just start off by introducing yourself, man.
My name is Henny. I'm born and raised in the DMV. Spent half my life in PG County, the other half in Fairfax, Virginia. So really from here. And I'm a partner and co-founder of a company called EQT, a full-service music company, management company, publishing company, and a record label with Universal Music Group.
Now, is Henny is that your birth name?
Nah, my real name is Henok, which is a pretty obvious Ethiopian name. So Henny, but people have been calling me Henny for short since high school, so it just kind of stuck. Yeah.
Dope. Yeah. It also it fits with the industry.
Right. The amount of Henny jokes that I get, but I'm used to it now. Yeah.
That's what's up, man. I want to start with this word first because I feel like it's gonna wind up being one of the major themes in the conversation. I want to define it early on from your perspective so that we're all facing the same direction. When I say the word infrastructure, what does that mean to you?
It's every aspect of an artist's career, right? Has a different level of infrastructure around it, right? So even the creative process a lot of times requires infrastructure, meaning the people, the tools, and the resources readily available to execute whatever the vision is, right? And having those things one-on-one in tandem where, you could go from the creative process to the touring process to the decisions of how you're gonna market and release, and having all the teams and people and resources in place to do that. I think that's really what, when you hear, people in music say infrastructure, that's what they mean.
Gotcha. And so that's the foundational level. Would you say that's the foundational level of success, is being able, in whatever capacity, whether it's the management team, label team, creative team, having a solid infrastructure around one? Would you say that's one of the core elements of success?
For sure, definitely. I mean, it's been huge for us. I think it's something that, me and my partner have focused on building from the jump. And we're, fortunate enough to find like-minded people to build with us early, a few from the DMV as well. I think in the earliest phase, when an artist is just being creative, I think they can get away with having less infrastructure. As they grow and get to another stage in their career, that infrastructure becomes more and more important, and I think where and when you tap into that is sometimes tricky or it's not obvious, but I think, that's the main purpose, I think, of having the infrastructure for sure.
Dope.
Yeah.
All right, so we have that title, infrastructure. I think that's super helpful as we move forward. So now let's take it back to the beginning when you didn't necessarily have this grandiose, large infrastructure and a lot of teams behind you, and it was just you're coming up in Northern Virginia. Do you remember like the first moment when you decided to get into the music industry? Was there a concert you went to, a show you went to, or album you heard where you kind of made that decision like, hey, I want to get involved in this thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously like anyone in music, I was just always a huge fan from day one. I remember the first CD I bought was the Q-Tip, the one that had Vibrant Thing on it, and that Q-Tip album. So, and it's funny, from day one, I always used to like turn CDs around and see what like the label was or what the company was, and then, dibble dabble with making music myself too, in high school, thinking I could rap, being in my homie's basement, making music and all that. So it's always been a part of me. There was definitely a time where, you're in college and especially being a first generation African kid, your parents are like, nah, that doesn't make sense. Like, why would you want to go into that? So you always have your kind of discouragement moments, when you're like, let me just study IT, let me study business. For me, I basically ended up interning at a studio in Falls Church. Shout out Rob and all those guys. They're still DJing in the area, still rocking. And I was the dude that could help them get their Facebook up, or I was the dude that could help them do computer stuff, because I was, I was majoring in IT when I was in community college. So that's where I started finding myself around the environment again, and it just felt supernatural. It felt like, oh yeah, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I was actually excited to like get off campus and go head over there and just kick it and just be in that environment and be in the studio and be around, the conversation of oh, who's better, Cudi or Cole or Wale? This is like 08, 09. And you just you follow your passion, right? You just kind of start to see the things that you care about, and you don't know if that's going to turn into a real job or not, but you just inherently get better and better at it because you're around it all the time, you know? I think the first time I realized that it's an industry I could actually go into was the first concert that I threw with my own money too. I was doing like club stuff at back then was Ultra Bar and Love and places like that. And then there was a real small venue near my old high school, West Springfield, called Jack's, right? And it was just like 500 cap venue and rock club, like it's a hardcore metal club. They don't really do rap there. I think a couple times like Jedi Mind Tricks or some shit played, but and I, somehow got connected with the owner, old white dude, hardcore rock and roll dude, and I was like, oh, I want to bring this rapper to this venue, and I sent them an email, and it was Mac Miller back then. It was 2010. And
is this before what was it? Was it the Kids mixtape?
Yeah, it was right. The Kids mixtape was just about to drop.
Okay,
so,
gotcha.
Yeah. So, and I, to be, looking at it in hindsight, I know he was more comfortable because it was a white kid. So he was like, oh yeah, we could do this. It's not a big,
Okay.
And beginner's luck, and never forget that day. Matt, Q, some of the guys that were around him, forever. They all came down in this like green Volvo from Pittsburgh, not knowing what was gonna happen. This is before he's ever been on his own national tour. So, but it was super sold out, ram-packed. I remember those kids outside flipping tickets for $80. So it was like a little bit of beginner's luck too, because I had more invested in this than like if you went to throw a party, right? Because you got to pay the artist and the venue fee and all kinds of stuff. So, and it just was, over exceeded what I thought was gonna happen. The energy was crazy, and that was the first time where I was like, obviously made some money, and that was the first time where I was like, oh, okay, like this is what I need to be doing, you know. And I didn't really know where that was gonna lead, if I was gonna be, a lifetime concert promoter, or discovering artists to book for shows was always fun too. So I was always deep into discovery and learning new artists and all that. So, but that was the moment where I was like, okay, this is what I should be doing,
So what I'm hearing early on that you did kind of as a base step is that you just kind of you put yourself in the environment around it. You intern at the studio, you're promoting clubs, you're just kind of around the environment. You don't necessarily know yet, but you're around it and you're learning while being in the environment. What are some of those things that you feel that you picked up on early on, kind of being around those environments in early spaces?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, being in the room is everything. The experience you get, the feelings that you get, the gut instincts you kind of create. Nobody can teach you. You can, read a book about music business or take a class or have someone mentor you, but it's nothing like really being in it and feeling it. And for me, at that time, especially being across, new budding artists that not everybody understood. Like a lot of times I book artists and my friends were like, I don't listen to that. Like, who is that? But, we'd put them in that 250 cap room or the 500 cap room and it'd be sold out. And you see the energy from, the kids and the different people in the venue and which songs stick and which ones, they know every single word to, and the album cuts to the old songs to the new songs. And I think being in that environment, constantly definitely helped just train my ear and, and also being able to tell what's real and what's fake. I think, press and marketing and sometimes things get given to people a certain way. And I remember my friends saying, oh man, that artist is like about to blow up. And I would kind of say like, like I might book him, I might not. And I would follow my gut, and there'd be things that my friends wouldn't be into that I thought was unique and interesting. And then those would be the shows that would do well. And I think that habit and being in those environments, it creates something that you can't really teach.
Yeah. Now, did you have that personality? Like, are you the guy who likes to sell things and talk to people? Because when people think about promoter, they're thinking about somebody who's they're not the life of the party, but they're always talking about what they're doing. Right. Are you that person that likes to do that?
Yeah. I think especially in my, in those younger days, being in the club a lot, being out, for sure. I think I think entrepreneurship kind of runs in my blood. I've just learned a lot from, my parents and what they do. And, just the idea of being able to give people an experience or being able to look at something and say how do I multiply this? How do I give this to people in the right way so they keep coming back? That was something that's always been in my mind, and and then having fun doing it. It's nothing like building a business that's truly your passion, something that you probably be doing for free anyway, right?
Yeah. So you're promoting clubs, you're finding these artists, and you're bringing them to the venues, and you're really early up on a lot of these things. Mm-hmm. When does it trigger for you? You know what? Maybe I should possibly start to manage some of these artists, or build a company, an infrastructure around these artists. When does that kind of click for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's always exciting to build a business, and I from the jump I always felt like that was innately what I wanted to do. So the first step was I got a little office space, which was funny enough. It was directly under the studio that I was interning. So they were like, "Oh man, you went ahead and got the first floor," So it felt like a level up moment. And like,
this is before you had an artist.
Before I had an artist. Yeah, okay. For sure, for the promotion company.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so we were trying to take off. I think that first show was like the momentum that we needed. And then there was sort of this era, the blog era of rap, where there was a lot of artists that were catching their waves, like Wiz and Currency and Crit and rest in peace Mac and Nipsey and all them. And the 930 Club or I don't think the Fillmore was even around back then, weren't necessarily looking to book those artists. So once I hit it off with a run with, I think it was Mac and then Big Sean, I think might have been the second one. I was like, I kind of found my thing that other people aren't paying attention to. So I was constantly, whether win or loss, I was, sometimes come up, sometimes come down, but I was betting on these artists that were just buzzing on YouTube, a lot of them even unsigned at that point, right? So when I hit that stride, I was like, I want to have an office space for this. Just like me being like, let me try to legitimize this. Mm-hmm. A lot of times you don't even really know what you're doing. You're just kind of like, I seen people do this and like, I need to do it this way. And, so I would have young kids come to the office to come pick up flyers to pass out at their high schools, or a lot of times independent artists in the area would want to open up for shows, so they would come pick up tickets, and it just became like this hub. And I had a friend of mine that was a producer that I actually met in a beat battle, which funny enough to this day I still manage him. Back then he went by B Dollar, now he goes by Louis Lastic. And he was like, hey, I could engineer in that back room, and that's how I could pick up some money while you have all these artists coming by to pick up tickets. So it was like, what's the saying? Necessity is the mother of invention, right? So having a studio just created, or having shows where people need to get in contact with me to be able to open up on these shows, develop this Rolodex of artists in the area. We're funneling them through the studio, and then it just kind of happened, and it kind of created this environment and this flow between the local scene, the artists that I was bringing in for national tours, getting the DMV tour stops, and that connectivity between them saying, okay, if I rock with Henny or work with him on something, then I get some exposure.
So I'm hearing a couple of things. One, I'm hearing that you found an innovative space that nobody was really in. Mm-hmm. You didn't necessarily, try to follow into a path. You saw where there was a gap and an opening, and you built your own space when it came to concert promotion. Nobody's looking at these artists. Let me fill that gap. Yeah. Which I think is super dope, especially for this area, because there's so many elements and spaces that are wide open that you just kind of found your niche and you began to plug in there.
Yeah.
I'm also hearing early on the partnerships, or you working with teams. Mm-hmm. That was really important for you.
Yeah.
And I even know that to this day you have members from the team that are from the DMV. So can you just talk to me about early on that process of building your team and working with different folks from this area, and how you winded up cultivating everybody all together?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, team is everything, right? I think you hear it a lot, but it's in practice, it's real to build with people that you're in sync with and you catch a flow with, and it's interesting seeing everyone evolve and change. You know what I mean? If I could think back to what we were doing back then, and some of the sessions and the artists we were working with, or we used to throw showcases back then. And it's funny, in one of those showcases, IDK was a young local rapper that was in that showcase maybe 7-8 years ago, and he's obviously having a great moment and continuing his career. Or Drew, who's in that group, They was one in that showcase and remembered it. So seeing some of the early signs and people that ended up being in the music industry full time, and some of those being team members of ours that have all developed and grown, some that stayed with us, some that went on to be at other companies. And I think more importantly, it's understanding that those relationships that you foster really early on and those people that you build with, some are gonna go, some are gonna stay, but those relationships are everything. They're like currency, you know what I mean? And being able to like have people on speed dial that you came up with, and watching everybody in the industry that kind of had artists or, you know, had their moments, whether it was a few years ago, everyone kind of has their ups and downs, but we're all sort of growing at the same time.
Yeah.
So being able to recognize that even beyond your core team, the one of the people that you're building with, not to be like cheesy, but we're all kind of like one big team, all the people that you got relationships with and people that I've known at the radio for years, and, you know, being able to come back and still tap in with them.
Yeah. What do you think is a part of your core philosophy in leading teams? Because I mean, you have guys that have been with you for, you know, 4 or 5 years. And when you think about this area, sometimes you hear conversations about loyalty and folks not sticking together and just like those sort of things, but you've had people who've been with you, you know, damn near almost the whole time.
Yeah.
As a leader, what are some gems that you can kind of pass on to other, you know, up and coming entrepreneurs about the way to lead your teams and that sort of thing?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, make sure your guys' vision is aligned, you know what I mean? And support what they're passionate about, you know, but when you're kind of like vetting and making sure you guys are going to work as a team, make sure that they're coming on board, you know, just as excited as you, being able to give them things to run with, right? Like, you know, I think early on, you know, a day one team member is like Kaz, so you know well, and once he was developing and he was being able to like make things happen on his own, I didn't shy away from just putting more work on his plate and saying, you know what, you go run with that and you go handle this process here, and like I'll even take a step back, and that's totally cool because I'm gonna work on this over here. And like people respect being empowered. People really appreciate you putting trust in them, and it's we've also put trust in people and seen balls dropped, and there's negative that comes from it, but you know, you also just gotta like trust the team you're building, and that goes a long way.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think the first time I had ever heard of the movement you were kind of building was 2014, when an artist you all were working with by the name of GoldLink, he has this record. It was like a freestyler song of like a TLC record. Was it the Creep? Or, okay, I remember hearing that, and one of my family members said, "This guy's from out of this area. Have you heard of him?" I was like, "No idea." But that was the first time I had ever heard of, you know, GoldLink and what you all were doing. So can you talk to me about, you know, you're finding your first artist, because for folks that's always like one of the most difficult things, finding that very first one. Number one, how did you all find GoldLink? And how did you all know that he was the right artist for you? Like, were there tests that you put him through? Or like, how did you know he was the one?
For sure. I mean, you know, at that time it was interesting because it was, I think he was like 18 or 19, and he came through with like a whole kind of group of artists with this program that a homie of mine was starting, where he was like, man, I'm gonna help like pay for some of these high school kids studio time, and I'd love to do it at your studio because, you know, they've been to some of your shows, they've heard about you, so you could act as like a mentor in a way too. And I was like, yeah, I'm totally down. And you know, I think we waived the studio time too because it was a nonprofit, and you know, so that's how we met, right? And then that group just kind of dissipated for whatever reason, and he was kind of the one that came back and was like, well, I liked recording here, I want to keep coming. And you know, there was a real sort of like raw talent in some of the like the earliest demos, you know what I mean? I think there was stuff that stood out, even though it wasn't polished, it didn't quite make sense. There was stuff that made it like sticky, and you know, and I was gravitating to it, and then I would put them in with producers that like, you know, Louis Lastic and people there, and they would be kind of impressed, like, man, they were excited, he just went crazy on this and that. And you know, I think having a huge Rolodex of artists that came by that studio, right? Just like I was constantly in my room working on my promotion stuff. Then you got clients in the back recording. So I heard all kinds of stuff, and you kind of know when you hear 100 artists recording and something you keep kind of going back to something, right? And again, going back to experience, seeing all the stuff that was selling out in the venues that I would throw, right? I would see the stuff that like would be half sold, that felt like hype, and I would see the shit that sold out in advance. And what that does is actually start to create like a sort of like a pathway to, okay, this is like more knowledge on the market, right? And knowing like, yo, this is what's working, this is why, this is how it feels to me. And all those things kind of came together where I was like, you know what, I think this might be the first artist we double down on and take serious. And there was a lot of artists that were clients that had that conversation with me, you know, like, hey, like, are you managing anybody? Or, you know, so it was tough to to say, yeah, this is the one. I was hesitant a few times for multiple reasons, but you go with your gut, and it worked. So
yeah, it's going to kind of be a macro/micro question. We're obviously talking about GoldLink, but I want to now frame it macro because you have a lot of artists that you've now grown to work with. Is there something like a skill set that you are specifically looking for, or you're like as a manager for somebody who's a manager or somebody who wants to have a label? What is it that you're looking for, or one should be training themselves to look for in finding that right talent or the person they should work with? Because you're almost, you're investing a lot of your life into it, and you don't want to waste your time with someone. And the other thing that it feels like too is it's almost like dating. Like you can meet somebody, and in the first couple months they can be cool, but then you really start to get to see the real them. So like, talk to me about like what someone should really be looking for when trying to find like those special talents, raw or not. You know, just what should you be looking for?
For sure. I mean, since then, obviously, like grown, and I think my mind and my ear has sort of developed on what I'm looking for, and of course, the relationship is super important. Like, is this someone that you could actually really work with? And just a unique point of view. You know what I mean? Like, I think an artist has to have the best artist, their soul and who they are as a person. Like, if you're building with them for a few months and you start building that relationship, you can almost hear their thoughts jump out the songs and jump out of the speaker, and you can hear their sort of like just how unique they are, and they're always unapologetically them. And when they can do that in a way that like sonically feels good, you know what I mean? I feel like that's a big thing for me. Historically, we've always worked with artists that you don't hear radio singles on the album, you know what I mean? Or you don't hear things that's gonna go off in the club right away. And for me, that, I think I would say it was in college when my ears started to get a little more experimental, right? Like growing up, I was always the dude that would burn the CD and put my friends on and stuff, but maybe it was stuff that I knew that they would like, or like, okay, cool, like you're gonna know about this in 2 months, and it'd be like the 50 Cent mixtape before Get Rich or Die Trying or whatever. And then I think in college I started to find stuff that like I loved, and I would pass it along, and maybe they wouldn't quite get it, you know what I mean? But I knew it was different and it was interesting, and I was discovering other genres. So for me personally, and I think luckily that became what's starting to really work for, now, especially in the streaming era, is artists that know how to take everything they're inspired by and then kind of mesh it into a melting pot and make something that we kind of haven't heard yet, right? Yeah. And I think those are the artists that really become impactful, really develop a true loyal fan base. And that for me is the stuff that I'm usually looking for.
How do you gauge like work ethic, and how do you gauge like whether or not your energies will match? Because person can have all that, but they just not be the right artist. So like, how do you tell like, if this person has that work ethic or not, or if they're the type that, might try to screw you over, like,
for sure. I mean, you pick up on it over time, you know what I'm saying? That's something that's like a hustler's gut. You know when someone got the drive and they know what's, and they'll, show and prove, It's unfortunate when you kind of get to that place where their work ethic doesn't match, and especially in this climate, more than any other climate, where it's just like 10 important albums that come out every week that you got to listen to, and there's just so much out there. Now the work ethic is even got to be on 100, right? To be able to cut through and stay relevant and stay active. It's something we look for even more now than maybe 5 or 6 years ago when we were first starting to look at artists, for sure.
How long is your courting period between like when you first meet an artist, or when you first think, this person could potentially be a part of the roster, to when you kind of, sign them?
It's all, there's no one size fits all, or, case by case. I think there are people that kind of blow you away right away, and by like the 4th or 5th time y'all are hanging, whether it's in the studio or chilling, or, talking about music and culture and visuals, and you start to really understand the person, you're like, oh shit, like I gotta be in business with this person, right? And then there's times that like it took a minute, like someone put you on and you're like, yo, this is dope. And then somehow it came up again, then it came up again. And then like 12 months later, y'all are in business together. I've had that happen too, so it just depends.
We talked about this earlier, kind of moving forward in the trajectory of your career. I think the first time that I actually probably then physically saw you in person, I was working at 300 at the time, and I know they were one of the labels who was courting GoldLink early on in his career, and I remember you all came by for the meeting, and this is another macro micro question, one of the things that I've noticed that you do is you're not quick to sign the artist because artist development is super important for you. So can you talk a little bit about, as a manager, what are some of those things, like when do you know when your artist is ready to sign? Because you didn't sign them, even when you all waited. Yeah. So what are you kind of like, looking for before you all decide to push that button on, signing?
Yeah, man, I think it's truly a marriage in the realest way. There's paperwork, all that, right? When you're like signing to a label and you're being official with a company like that, and you kind of know when it's the right fit. Like, when, okay, like between, are you going to be a priority there? And like, what else do they have that kind of maybe complements what you're doing, but isn't exactly like that artist? Or, or have you built up enough leverage as an artist to where you can go in there and the deal's going to make sense for where you're at in your career, right? That's important. It just really depends. I mean, like, every situation is going to be different. There's sometimes an artist that has all the resources to be able to create the music, shoot the videos, maybe their manager's a director, and they're able to kind of get the ball rolling a little bit faster, right? Before being able to have to necessarily sign, right? Because ultimately signing is also about funding, right? It's about strategy, resources, but it's also about funding. So like, where are you at in your career? What are the things that you're missing, right? What are the things that you have? What can you leverage to make everything make sense to you? And again, is it like really the right fit? And a lot of those questions is what really drove me and my partner to just start our own label, right? Was us saying that maybe these artists don't fit at this label or that label, but they fit with us if we got the funding and we got the autonomy and we were able to plug away because we've done that development independently before. And you're seeing it a lot now with, a bunch of our peers, whether it's like my guy Tunji at RCA with Keep Cool, or since the 80s, Key, Barry, and Zeke, those are fam. There's a lot of us that came up and we proved that we know how to take interesting artists from 0 to 60, and maybe the label's taking it from 60 to 100 with us. But when you actually just give us the infrastructure, that word again, and like the ability and the oversight, that's actually what the label wants, right? The label knows that they can't be in the DMV developing a young GoldLink, picking the, they're not even trying to do that, right? They know that we understand his culture and how to move that around in that artist's culture. And they want to be in business with people that understand that, rather than signing it and maybe it was a really hot thing because everybody was talking about it, the blogs were writing about it, it's moving on Spotify, but it's like, all right, now what? Like, you got to still break this artist, right? That was a long-winded answer, but hopefully that answers.
I like your 0 to 60 and then 60 to 100 analogy. I think that that's really interesting, and if people are able to kind of like possibly grasp that as a concept in a mind state, that could be like really helpful. Like, what part of the trajectory is your artist on? Yeah. And having that. Let's talk hit records for a minute. I heard you say earlier, you're not necessarily looking to sign talent that, needs a radio single in order to have a career, but it doesn't hurt.
Right.
At all.
For sure.
Right. No. So let's
having
talk
a hit
about.
Feels good, definitely.
Yeah.
For sure.
Absolutely. So I want to do a two-parter. One, is there a science behind a hit record that you've seen?
I mean, there's people that definitely will say there is, right? Okay. And obviously there has been in the past. I think now more than ever, where radio kind of has the least amount of sort of like impact that it, every year on year, I think streaming has proven that it's really the last thing you need is a radio hit, right? I would say no. And really it's a hit in this climate is a unique record coming from the artist and what's out in the market right now, right? Them being themselves and that record connecting based off of what else is kind of in the market, right? It's not where the hook goes. It's not like, oh, you got to arrange it like this because it's a hit, like, a lot of classic producers would do. It's, and now too, what is a hit in an environment where we're not in a club, it's because of COVID. We're not necessarily all listening to the radio like we did before. It's almost like there's a ton of these culture hits. There's songs that kind of like live a little bit more in a vacuum, but are actually huge records. And you only really get a few records that are everywhere. Like, you can't escape those songs. It's kind of like hard to find records like that, like it used to be. So, I think we're getting closer and closer to a world where that separation is even more of like, there's a song that you and all your friends love that's huge to you guys that like I haven't heard, right? And that was a little less likely when we were growing up, 10 or 15 years ago. So
yeah, I think that you all were one of the first, when you talk about these kind of unconventional sounding hits where there's not the proper hook verse kind of structure that is able to take off, but it's almost like, and I'm speaking about now the huge record you all had with Crew in 2017, right? 2017, where it starts with the hook, and you have these verses, and then it now ends with the hook. It's almost like the What's Poppin' thing that we kind of saw Jack Harlow do. Like, so talk to me about like, can you give the backstory? I know you've talked about it a few times, but for our audience, can you talk about what it was like being a part of that record, how it came together, and then the legs you saw it kind of had?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's nothing, even now in hindsight, it actually just went 4 times platinum recently. So it's proven to be like this sticky record that people really care about and is impactful, which is amazing. It would be lying if we said we thought it was gonna be that big when it was cut. I remember Brent and GoldLink were in the studio in LA. There was 2 demos that got sent back from that session. That was one of them. That was the one that just felt stronger, felt more complete. And then, Benny T, who's, been with Shy since day one, is a good friend of mine. So I hit Benny like, man, Shy and GoldLink had the XXL freshman look last year, but they still don't got a record together. I think I finally got something that would make sense because their music is so different, especially everything he made before that. I sent that to him. He loved it, cut it in like a week, sent it back, and then D and Shy connected on it. And it was like, oh, okay, this is something. It's still, the rest of the album felt so different than that record. But I remember when it came out in December of 2016, it kind of came out towards the end of the year, and we weren't finished with the album yet, right? Because the album didn't come out till March. But we're like, man, let's just like throw something out. And I remember the label, RCA, saying, yeah, let's just put this out. Like, this is cool. Like, yeah, it could be like a good DMV moment. Didn't think anything of it. And I remember coming back around Christmas break and people, because I was in LA, right? So I was in LA at that time. So I came back for Christmas break and hearing people talk about it, like in a way that they've never talked about a record from them before, right? Then it just kind of picked up steam, and you can kind of feel that people were gravitating to it. And it was really like one of those slow burners. I don't know if you remember, but it was like, I think the radio might have jumped on right at the start of the summer, and that's when it picked up, and it didn't really feel like it hit its peak until the end of 2017, maybe even going into 2018 a little bit. So yeah, I mean, special records like that are actually impactful, you feel them in culture, and that slow burn helped the growth of that song in a lot of ways, right? That it didn't just speed to the top. I feel like, the way I look at it is it almost went through all the right channels, right? It was like tastemakers and whatever the hipsters, however you want to call it, co-signed it and championed it first, and it slowly made its way to like the cool parties, not the mainstream clubs, but like the parties where it's the DJ and it's 200 people there and all the fashion people there in New York, and then like made its way up to the clubs and radio, and you just saw, and then the Gucci remix came out, and that record really went through every step it needed to for it to matter and for it to really stick. I remember seeing Pitchfork put it on the top 10 songs of the decade, and there's a few lists that put it in the category of songs in the whole decade, maybe not top 10, but in the whole top 100 for the whole decade. Yeah. So yeah, when you have a real special record like that, it's definitely like kind of irreplaceable feeling.
So there were 2 things, especially when you talk about home and the DMV for me, that really stand out. The first is the 2 sold out shows you did at the Fillmore. Mm-hmm. And how you all had, I feel like Brent was there and Shy was there.
We had to have everybody there.
Everybody was there. I think Wale was there at a certain point, right? Like that. And then the second piece was the Go-Go remixes. Yeah. Right? So can you talk to me about, once you now kind of began to ascend, you immediately brought it back home. And you took it back home. Was that conscious? Was that something that you all were thinking about?
Yeah.
Can you talk to me about that?
For sure, man. I think, and that's a good example of just like paying attention to culture and, understanding that the blueprint of that song was meant to be like this DMV anthem in a way, right? I mean, even making sure we shot the video back home, and then doing the Go-Go remixes, shout out to Kaz, that was something that he led on, and we kind of brainstormed that. And that's a good example too of something that a major label might not quite understand. If we didn't have a real close relationship with our A&Rs, Derek and Tunji, Like they're like some of my closest friends in the industry. They understood that, yeah, this is important. Like, we got to do this. Whereas, like, a lot of times a major label would have been like, what's go-go? Why are we spending anything at all on a go-go remix, right? All the way down to like when we were doing a remix, there was a few options of big Southern rappers that we thought that could take this record and move it into the club. And I remember saying, you know what, like, Gucci has such a long-standing history with the DMV. Like, I remember coming up and, Gucci would headline DC Star back in the day, and it'd be go-go bands opening up, and right. So like understanding that culture and knowing that Gucci actually kind of completes a circle to move this record into different spaces. Again, an example of just really understanding the artist and the culture that you're building, and always putting that first.
This is now a macro question that I'm gonna have, and I'm gonna kind of frame it now with another artist that you're working with, Masego, who I feel like I saw him 2014, 15 in like Babylon Lounge, like in Alley's like, so just kind of seeing his ascension and rise and how he is a non-conventional artist. He makes, when he's performing, he's making the beat on stage. He's playing the saxophone. Like, he's not necessarily anything when you think about mainstream, but yet you all were able to kind of ascend him into mainstream culture.
Right, for sure. Yeah.
So the question that I'm gonna ask is, when you're talking about developing an artist and for a manager, if you had to give me the top 3 things for developing an artist that you feel like is in your ethos, your company's ethos, what are those 3 things that you want to make sure that you do when you're developing talent?
For sure. Let me see, top 3, man, there's a few things. Let's see. I think one, understanding, and not in any particular order, but like one, understanding the culture of the artist, right? Really understanding like where they come from, what they're about, what they care about, where they see themselves, you know what I mean? It has been big for us to focus on where artists are from just naturally, whether it's, obviously GoldLink from the DMV, Masego from Virginia Beach, but he has some like Jamaican roots as well, and we've tapped that. I think telling that story is really important. Then number 2 would be storytelling, just as much and as important as the music is, to really develop an artist and not just a hit song, right? You gotta tell a story. Storytelling I think is really important. And then 3, the artist needs to be open-minded, right? Like, there could have been plenty of times in the artists that I work with careers about how they were sort of stuck on a certain path, or they were really gung-ho about a particular thing, and being able to have that relationship with them to keep them open-minded and guide them to what a hit would sound like that feels like them, right? So.
Yeah, That's really dope. So we also have Smino, another artist you've worked with.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me a little bit about what it was like? Like, how do you now begin to think about building individual blueprints for your artist careers? Because he's also somebody who's completely different from the GoldLink and the Masego. But you can get to a point where you have a few, so like you're thinking, can I just do copy paste?
Right.
But you handle all of them differently. So can you talk to me about like what it was like building Smino's blueprint and how you approached it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the biggest things that I connected on with him from the jump was him being from St. Louis. And I remember meeting him for the first time at South by Southwest. I want to say it was 2015. And that's when I met him in person. And we just like talked a little bit online, and just seeing like, and he was very different then than he is now. His energy was a little bit different, but he just still had just super funny and charismatic and had that thing about him. And then I remember being in Chicago later that year in the summer and hearing some of the music that was about to come out in the fall. And that was where I was like, oh wow, like there's a super unique point of view. Him and his producer, Monty Booker, created an amazing sound that really felt like them. You could kind of hear how jointly connected they were in the music. And then also it was a nod to the culture that was happening with Left to Center R&B, and shout out Joe K and Selection and everyone over there. They were creating this like whole community in this world of people that are rooted in R&B and hip hop, but their ears are a little bit different. They want to dance, they want to go out, and he was making almost his own version of something that fit in that space, and that got me super excited, and me and him super connected on telling that story of St. Louis, another underappreciated market, right? I think I'm a big supporter of people that kind of put their city on their back, and really run with it. And we were super aligned on that. So yeah, and then as you go, you learn different things. You learn the things that they need, and you kind of build the team around them and what they need. Yeah.
Is it tough having to split your time between so many different artists once you begin to build and grow and everybody wants a piece of you and you're the boss at the end of the day. So I might have my day-to-day, but Henny's the boss.
Right. I mean, I try to always keep the flow with everyone. Everyone always has multiple people around them, right? I mean, like with me, for example, it's Chris Classic in Chicago. We co-managed him for a long time together with GoldLink. I keep Kaz super close to it, and that's how we developed that. Masego has someone, Justin, that's on our team that's great. So I never go into it thinking like, yep, I manage you, it's all me. Like from the jump, I always create that energy of like, I'm gonna add value through my experience, my relationships, how I like to do business, even in the music, if you let me, and we have that vibe on the music, on the creative tip, but let's find a creative director. Let's find a really dope day-to-day. All my guys, for the most part, are at different agencies. You know what I mean? One at CAA, one at Paradigm, one at UTA. Just kind of creating
that infrastructure.
There you go.
It goes back to it. You create that infrastructure around the artist.
Exactly. And they have to buy into it. You know what I mean? Not every artist buys into it. I think some artists just really want you and your time. And I think now we're getting to a place as a company where they can see that, there's a lot of support here, growing the team to now a staff of 10 between LA and New York. Mostly everyone's in LA and we have an office and studios there. So I think as long as you create the environment for them, then the rest kind of figures itself out.
Yeah. I want to take a little bit of a turn here really quickly and talk about the super impressive but also creative deal that you have with UMG and your company has with UMG. For those who don't know, can you just kind of give like a brief rundown of what that is and why it feels so kind of genre defining as far as labels go? Because, to my knowledge, you can help if there's another one, somebody else who has that type of deal, but I haven't ever heard of anybody that has that type of deal.
For sure. I mean, there's definitely a few people that have variations of that type of deal. I think for us, why it was important was artist development, right? When you find these artists that are creative and different and, maybe there's a few labels kind of interested, but they don't necessarily have the tools and the right people for it. At that point, the deal isn't necessarily about, like how big was the check or like what were all your terms. Like it's more about like, okay, well, you need time, right? Time is super important. You need probably 2 years of putting out music with no pressure just to create that energy and that flow with your fans, right? And that's not really something that a major label gives you, to be honest, right? Like once you go do that $1 million deal with a major label, the clock sets, right? It's like it is a business. So, and with the way that we did our deal, we're able to sign these artists directly to EQT, distribute through UMG, like how an indie label or indie artist would distribute. And now there's not a clock that got set, right? So we can really curate and develop and market. Obviously, a lot of those things are going to be on smaller budgets naturally because they're still developing as it should be. And then once that they hit that corner, then we're picking the right partner and not necessarily forced just to go to one UMG subsidiary, but we could kind of pick the one that has the right A&R, the right marketing person, just the right energy in general to work with that artist. So for us, that was super important just because of the way that we develop acts, right? I think being a JV of one of the major labels, and that's all you're doing, that could work too. You know what I mean? Depending on like how quickly is it an artist that has that's sitting on multiple records that you want to go straight to radio with? Are you only signing 1 or 2 acts a year? So you want to be like just hyper focused and you only need it to be at one place. But for us, that's what made sense with the way that we develop. And there's even artists that maybe never really make sense on a major label that we might work with that just make super interesting different types of projects. And we're like, you know what? We love this. Like, let's figure out how this makes sense and we'll just distribute it for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of building on top of that, as someone who lives in LA now, I want to know what you've seen as a difference in this infrastructure piece between LA and DC, and what is something that you feel like tangibly somebody who's listening to this from the DMV, they could do to kind of move themselves closer, who's interested in helping to be a part in building that infrastructure piece. So the first part is like, what do you see as a difference between the two infrastructures? Mm-hmm. And then second, somebody from the DMV, something they can tangibly do to kind of like begin building that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we were in that, I think it was on Clubhouse in that room where everybody was just talking about why isn't the DMV, it's been a conversation for years, like why can't the DMV be like Atlanta, right? Why can't the DMV, it's the nation's capital, it's a huge market. And for me personally, because I've been thinking a lot about it while I've been home, you know, for the holidays, I came here and thankfully been able to spend some real time here. And for me, it starts with the coaches and the executives, you know, even before the artists, right? It's the people that are guiding the artist to that place. It's like if you can, you know, it takes a village to raise a child, right? Like that saying, it's like it takes people in the area that got the right mentorship, the right training to be able to develop the artist and actually be kind of like a vetting system to pick the right artists that have the work ethic, have the unique talent, are ready to put the time in and help guide them to the next step from my point of view.
Okay. So was there anything that you feel like tangibly right now, like somebody who wants to, let's say manager, right? Let's say somebody, because I feel like we have you know, Dre the mayor, but there are very few who you can think from this area. So if somebody was like, okay, you know what? I want to start a management company. That's going to be my added value to this now DMV infrastructure.
Yeah, for sure.
What would you say is, like, what do they need to do? Like, what are some of the things they need to kind of...
Yeah, I mean, well, it starts with the artist, right? So, you know what I mean? You got to find an artist that you're incredibly passionate about, have a vision for, you know, and then find a mentor, you know? Like, and early on, I didn't even necessarily have one. And a lot of times I wish I did. So for me, that's at this, you know, still very early in my career, but this part of my career, I'm getting to a place where I'm like, man, I got to really like give this knowledge out and tap in back home and see like who has like a vision, they're working hard, they're actually picking some really dope artists, and not every artist is gonna be super successful, but even through that process, they're gonna learn things that are invaluable for when they do find that right artist, right? And you know, I've actually spoke with Dre about this and other people back home that, you know, I've been fortunate enough to I had to leave as well and go to LA and build my business there. And I've only been in LA for about 5 or 6 years. But how do you create sort of like a system to tap in with some of these young executives, young managers, even young publicists, people that want to be agents? And there's a bunch of us in the industry scattered around. Like someone will see my 703 number because I still got a 703 number, and they'll be like, oh shit, you from Virginia? And we'll always tap in and talk about it. And you know, they might be someone's manager, or they might be at an agency, it might be working in a label, but there's not necessarily a centralized way to give opportunities to young managers and executives that are coming up in the DMV. For me, I think that's one of the first steps, one of the most important steps. And again, time, like it's gonna take a minute. Like for DMV to have a shot to even look and feel like what Atlanta's been able to do, it's a 10, 15, 20 year process, but you gotta start somewhere, you know?